Welcome everybody. It will be our 5th webinar of a series of webinars focusing on the challenges in mobility around the world. My name is Mieke Masselink and I'm a community manager for the Smart Mobility Embassy, which is hosted by Connect. Connect is an independent network organization in mobility and logistics in the Netherlands, where we bring people, knowledge and expertise from different organizations and different countries together. We focus on the international public-private dialogue with the aim of creating a greater impact on our society with solutions that are initiated and accelerated through collaboration. And today we are here together to address a challenge around the implementation of zero-emission zones, at least in the Netherlands, a very hot topic. And as in other countries and cities, I think the Paris climate goals were a major push to make our cities cleaner. But the question is, how do we do that? In many cities around the world, you see governments experimenting with low emission zones, for example, but under the Dutch climate agreement, the aim is to implement zero emission zones in 30 to 40 cities by 2025. So within 4 years. But we're also facing some challenges in relation to these ambitious goals, something that we would like to discuss with all of you today. For example, which policies should be implemented today to also help the companies to adopt and invest in their business operations? Will there be sufficient affordable electric vehicles or green alternatives available? What expertise is needed within the municipalities? But luckily today we're talking to several experts that are helping us to find answers on how to successfully implement a zero-emission zone. Here today with us, Remco Hoogma from CE Delft, Jos Streng from the City of Government, and Sanne Elvers from Districon. Remco, I would like to start with you. Could you give us just a quick status update on the implementation of zero-emission zones in the Netherlands?
Sure. Let me first say that I am working in the program to support the cities in the Netherlands to implement the zones as a contact person for all the municipalities. So I am in regular contact with all of them. In our program, we have been supporting over 40 cities to make the plans for the implementation. But it does not mean that they've all made the decision to start the zone. You heard the goal is 30 up to 40. Today, 26 of the cities have announced that they want to implement a zone. Some have made a lot more preparations than others, though. You can say the ideas have been developed mainly among the big cities, the Great Four, or the Big Four, as we call them in the Netherlands. Let's say the 1.5 million plus cities: Rotterdam, Amsterdam, The Hague, Utrecht. But then there's a large group of smaller cities. There's a few, let's say 200,000 plus, but the rest is in the order of 100,000 plus or even smaller. The legal situation is that implementing a zone is a local responsibility and authority, so it's not something that can be mandated from the national level or from a regional level, so it's a local responsibility. So in each and every case, there has to be a local decision process that needs to be followed. With all the local stakeholders and the regional stakeholders that have a say. So you can imagine that it takes time to make the plans. And that means that in the introduction it was said the goal is to have the zones by 2025. That's not completely correct. By law, it is not allowed to have it before 2025. And the goal was to have as many as possible in 2025, but we see that due to the local processes, some will not make it, and they will start maybe in 2026 or 27. So 26 of these cities have made the decision, but there's still work to do to get to the point that the zones actually start. And you can imagine that there's still going to be a few elections in the meanwhile, so we hope that the local plans will not be changed. On the other hand, there's also possibilities in cities where the local politicians have been hesitant that their successors will be more inclined to follow the trend and also adopt the plans. Is that a good first impression?
Absolutely. I'm curious, how are the zones, the zero emission zones, usually designed, and what are the, well, in most cases, I guess, expected effects, or maybe already the first effects of the implementation of these zones?
Okay. Well, you can say there have been zones before, low emission zones, or environmental zones as we call them, which were designed because of air quality policies. In cases where in cities there were excesses of bad air concentrations, zones were implemented on the basis of excluding the most polluting trucks. In some cases also vans, but mainly trucks. So in many cases, these boundaries or these zones have been taken as a starting point also to make the next step, which is the step towards zero emission. In other cities, they've chosen more like a logical geographical size, like within the urban motorway ring, or within the canal zone, or within the old city walls.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they have decided to use let's say, the shopping zone as the zero emission zone, which is usually quite small. So we're not fully happy with that, but okay, in some cases it was the best that could be done, and hopefully it can be expanded from there. The effects so far, there's no zone yet. So, of course, there's no measurable effect so far. There's a calculated effect, the expected effect if these 30 to 40 cities adopt the zones, and that has been calculated in the order of 1 megaton CO2, which of course is not the effect of the zone alone, but as the package that you need. It's also the changeover to new types of vehicles, reorganization of the distribution chains, and so on. You could say that the plans for the zones do already have a qualitative effect. We see that there's a lot of discussion and testing taking place within the sector, within the market, to find solutions for a future zero-emission situation. On the one hand, this is testing and buying the electric vehicles, supported also with national sport grant schemes. There's an existing grant scheme for electric vans. There's another scheme in preparation for trucks, and another one actually also for zero emission building equipment. So we see that basically all the logistics companies are preparing for the future. And yeah, that's of course important, because one way is to change over, just to say, okay, I have diesel vehicle now, I'll take an electric one. But even better is if they really rethink their logistics operation and maybe think, oh, maybe we don't need this amount of vehicles, or why do I use my vehicle to get into the zone, whereas my colleague competitor is also doing it? Can't we work together? Or, hey, there's an interesting startup that has a solution for last mile. Why don't I give them part of my work in a win-win situation? So this is the effects that we see now, and that we hope to spread also, so that the market is ready in the years that the zones start.
And to get there, because you are expressing some positive effects, to get there, what should be the next steps right now?
Well, I mentioned them. The vehicles have to be tested. The new logistics setups need to be tried out. Companies that are ready to make the investments but see a financial gap need to get support from grant schemes. Of course, then practical questions also arise, like where to charge the vehicles. Can the electric grid handle this? What solutions do we need to develop to have the whole system in place in time? For cities also a control mechanism on who is getting access into the zones and who should be banned or fined or whatever. So these elements all need to be developed in the coming years. And since many, let's say all of these municipalities share the same kind of questions in different extents usually, but it's the same kind of questions everywhere, it's important that we set up a good network to share the experiences, to share the questions, to share the answers. And that's the support that we try to give from our program.
Well, that sounds good. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Remco. I would like to move on to Jos, who's working for the city of Rotterdam, which was already mentioned also by Remco, maybe as one of the front runners in the Netherlands. Jos, which problems or issues specifically in Rotterdam should zero emission zones be the solution to?
Well, good morning, everyone. I think that the problems to be solved by the zone or making city logistics more sustainable in general is not very specific to Rotterdam. That is also, I think, why a national approach, or even a European, you could say, or worldwide, is supported in various international organizations which we are a member of. But of course, these are primarily the quality of life, including accessibility in the urban environment. And the other point is the growing competition for public space, or for space in general, also industrial space in urban environment. Yeah. We need to be very efficient in use of public space. So also from the logistics side, it's more or less the metabolism of the city, you could say, the transporting of goods and the exporting of waste. And this, of course, should function to provide right living conditions for the urban organism, so to speak. So on the one hand, efficiency. On the other hand, we need to be sure that there's sufficient space to do what's necessary, also traffic space. So in the dialogue about how are we going to divide space in the densified city, the logistics sector, of course, needs to come to the table with sufficient knowledge and evidence to say we need this and this is the optimum.
And you've also created a roadmap for the city of Rotterdam to implement these zero emission zones. Can you take us quickly through the, I think, 6 steps and this also describe where you stand today?
Yes, that's correct. There is a document in English describing this roadmap, so I'll keep it very brief. Anyone interested can consult it. Perhaps you can send a link to anyone interested. I'll provide it to you. The first step is to have the mayor and the executive board of the city establish the roadmap itself. So the decision to prepare for the introduction of a zero emission zone. Also describing the process, that's actually step 2, setting up a covenant with the logistics sector. So all the stakeholders involved who are going to experience the consequences of the introduction of such a zone, and they need to be included. So our process in determining, for instance, the size of the zone was in consulting. We consulted the sector. Actually, they advised us to make it as large as it is now, because originally our thoughts were also the current low emission zone for all traffic was the logical consideration. But then people said from companies, our investment in sustainable logistics, the transition, is more worth our while if the area we can serve is larger. So that's why we came up with a rather large zone comparable to Amsterdam within the national road ring, as Redco indicated. And the third step is to implement an action program once we have the covenant signed. We did that in December last year, so step 1 and 2 have been taken. The third is to carry out the action program and monitor the progress towards the situation in 25, when the zone is going to be become effective. The fourth step then, of course, is the legal procedure. So the traffic order has to be defined and announced. And then the fifth step will be the preparation for the introduction, including the installment of any additional cameras we require for the enforcement. So to be able to know who's going in and if they are complying with the access rules. Yeah. And then the sixth step, of course, is monitoring and evaluation, which is actually already starting. We are hoping to present our first monitoring report after 1 year after the announcement of the zone in December of this year.
Wow, great. And you already mentioned that you cannot do it only by yourself. You also need to be in contact with the logistics sector. There's also some efforts asked by them. But how do you describe your role as a city government to make sure that this will be implemented successfully?
Well, I think you could say that we are co-initiator. We're not the only one. We're already in a dialogue, productive dialogue with the front runners in the sector. Of course, we are the regulators, but our role, of course, is to make sure that any rules, any regulation we impose on the citizens and the companies in Rotterdam, that they are fair and taking into account the effects for that community. And also, of course, this is some of these things are handled at national level. There is a committee for the so-called uitvoeringsagenda, which is in which we participate actively from the local authority perspective. We participate and contribute, but then we make it very clear that the companies, the logistic actors, they need to make the change. And of course, there is a modest role for our own organization, because we are also logistic actors. We have a fleet of duty vehicles collecting waste. So we have a plan in action to make sure that that is also on its way to being zero emission by 2030. So according to the access rules for the zero emission zone. And actually that is, of course, for all of Rotterdam, because we are not limiting that to a part of the city. It's for all of Rotterdam.
Yeah. And if you can summarize the major challenge that you are facing as a government, and then also, you know, we have some experts here also present. What would you like to get from them? What do you need, or what do you? How could they help you? That's the question, maybe.
Well, there are many challenges, so I'm not sure which one I'm going to mention for fear of leaving out something else I'm going to regret later. But in preparing for this webinar, I realized, okay, I have one joint message for everyone attending this webinar and listening, because we are all consumers. And as such, we are active in a logistic system. We are receivers of goods, we return goods. So our private individual decisions have some influence, however modest, on the development and the sustainable future of city logistics. So the awareness that that is the fact, I think, is something I'd like to share with this audience. And apart from from that, of course, the role of anyone in the audience, everyone can contribute. And if you want an example how we think this is working, please consult the document, the covenant. I'll share it with you as well. And of course, any additional information if you want to know more specifically for Rotterdam.
Well, thank you, Jos. I think we have one last question also for you that was mentioned in the chat. What about the public transportation? Most of urban buses are still no clean buses. Will there be something in the law to allow dirty buses to drive in the city?
It's a valid question, although somewhat outside the scope of the webinar itself. But of course, colleagues of mine, we are aware that all of traffic, of course, is contributing to the problem and needs to be part of the solution. And for instance, the concession we have for contracts for public transport, I think, give a fairly good guarantee that more or less in rhythm with the planning for the zero emission zone for city logistics, that public transport will go through the same transition.
Right. Thank you, Jos.
You're welcome.
I would like to move on to Sanne. Sanne is also working at Districon with a large logistics network, and you also help local authorities to define the zero emission zones, how to implement this, and advise them also a bit about the charging infrastructure that comes with this. I would like to know in general, how do you feel that the logistics sector responds to the announcements of these cities that need to get like the zero emission zones?
Yes, thank you, Mieke. Indeed, we are assisting both governmental organizations and companies in the transition towards sustainable logistics. And the implementation of the zero emission zones is one of these teams. So to my experience, the logistics sector actually responds very mixed. So if we look into the delivery vans, there the majority of the companies is convinced that electric is the future. But the challenge there is to reach and assist the very small companies for which logistics is not their core business and maybe only have 1 or 2 vans. For example, the bakery at the corner of your street. How are you going to reach all those small local companies and make them aware of this transition? But if we look at the large trucks, there you see a different flow. There you have all the front runners who are eager to learn and experiment with those electric trucks. But it seems to be that there is also a large group who still doesn't believe that it's actually going to work. So they are waiting until they are forced to change, or that it's really proven that it's a good technology, which also will be cheaper than the trucks they are using at this moment.
Thank you. And how would you describe the role of technology in implementing zero emission zones? There was already something mentioned about the cameras and the enforcement. Can you say something about that?
Yes, so technology is indeed very important. So not only for the enforcement of which trucks are going inside and outside the zone, but also to make it possible for hybrid trucks to use that as a technology as well. For example, by technologies like geofencing, that the engine will automatically switch to electric when you enter the zone. But also for the development of the batteries of the trucks to make them smaller, lighter, more efficient, and as well cheaper in order that more companies can use them, and also to make our charging infrastructure faster.
That makes sense. We hear a lot today also about the pros of implementing such zones, but I'm also curious if there are any cons. So what is the negative side of these zero emission zones? I'm, for example, thinking about the diversity of suppliers with suitable vehicles. That might be only a short-term issue though, but are there any other negative sides of the implementation of these zones?
Yeah, so the implementation of a zero emission zone also has side effects. So for example, it is important to choose the borders of your zone wisely. You want to maintain a level playing field for the entrepreneurs inside and outside the zone, in order that there will not be any competitive disadvantages. But also implementing a zero emission zone in one city has effect on the surrounding cities. For example, on the charging infrastructure, the needs might be in the other cities as well, but also where are you going to locate the hubs, and the displacement of the emissions. It can be that they might be moved to the next city as well. And another side effect is that at this moment, electric vehicles are heavier than combustion engine vehicles. So in relation to problems like the bridges and case in Amsterdam, it's a challenge which we need to face.
Okay, and it was discussed before, the logistics sector also needs to invest in adopt. Do you see opportunities for certain policies that should be helping them to make that change?
Yes, so I think the most important thing is actually informing those companies very well. So what are the actual costs of the transition and how can you make that financially attractive? And also what are maybe other advantages of driving electric? But also provide them information on how can you implement an electric vehicle. Like Remco already said, it's not just changing one car by another. It really needs to be in transition where you also need to take into account other factors like which size of battery do I need, which charging infrastructure do I need, where am I going to charge, is my power grid connection suitable for that? How could I change that if it's not? Or how does driving electric affect the planning of my trucks and drivers? That are all kinds of factors that you need to take into account if you want to drive electric. And besides that, there can also be policies developed in order to make it possible for grid operators to realize grid reinforcements in time. And to provide clear information to companies on the timelines of the changes of the grid.
Sanne, and also maybe for you, Remco, do you feel like within all the municipalities you need new or other knowledge when it comes to zero emission zones? Thinking also about the geographical location, the whole energy transition. So the how does that system work? What's the expected energy needs for all the electric vehicles? That might be also a change in knowledge you will need at the municipalities. Is that correct?
Yes, I can answer that question, and maybe then Remco can respond. But municipalities should get insights in, for example, the expected charging needs. So actually, every logistics sector has its own characteristics and its own characteristic needs for charging. So where are those vehicles going to charge? Will it be on private or public locations? And is the power grid able to fulfill those expected power needs? For example, at business parks, you can get a very high demand of power during the night when all trucks are charged overnight. And also previous studies show that electricity demand for electric delivery vans within a city almost equals the electricity demand for passenger cars. And many cities are not aware of these insights.
Remco, do you have anything to add?
Yes. It's true. This topic requires that municipalities bring together new areas of expertise, and the larger municipalities have more opportunities to do that than the smaller ones. So that's why from the national government there's also a support program for the municipalities where with national funding they can hire expertise to support them in their local studies and decision making. And then we try to organize it in such a way that lessons learned in one municipality are also shared with the others, so that the whole network is learning how to deal with these questions. And we still have a lot to do in the coming years, and not all the answers are there already yet.
We also got a question from Hamburg, Wit. How about specific examples of international cooperation between the Netherlands and other EU cities related to this topic? Jos, Remco, Sanne, any examples?
Well, I can say that in the last year or so, I've given a number of presentations, like in the Polish network and in a Dutch North Rhine-Westphalia cooperation, and two Flemish colleagues about our zones. The message always is we want to cooperate. The Netherlands is too small to impact the worldwide availability of vehicles and the strategies of the car industry. So we need to work together on this, and not only the car industries, but also the logistics companies that in many cases are also internationally oriented. So yes, any opportunities to cooperate on this is important. And if for Hamburg you're interested to do that, please let me know.
Another question popped up. Maybe you can explain the question yourself.
I think that's what you're asking me, Mieke?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Evrim Akar. And my question is actually following on the previous question. Remco, you told us that there are now 26 cities that already decided to implement the zero-emission zone. And are there also cities close to the borders with Germany and Belgium in between them? Because I can imagine that there are a lot of international vehicles driving around, and I'm interested in how the countries interact with each other, especially for enforcement.
Yes, examples are Enschede and Maastricht and well, the Brabant cities, a bit further from the border maybe. But yeah, especially for Maastricht and Enschede, the topic of how to identify and deal with foreign number plates has been a topic. I'm not sure about the latest about the status, but there was a difficulty to exchange number plate information between the countries. I think there was an agreement with either Germany or Belgium, but the other country not yet. So yeah, that is a question that needs to be dealt with. There was a kind of a workaround solution in Maastricht. So it is not a barrier to introduce the zones, but yeah, it's kind of a small flaw that needs to be corrected yeah, to give everybody the same treatment.
Thank you. Another question is if the list of all these zero emission zones is online available.
Yeah, I'll share it in the
Great.
in the chat.
Thank you, Remco. Any other questions or maybe responses, remarks on well, what is happening here in the Netherlands? Jos?
Yeah, I have one addition to the answer that Remco gave to Akar regarding the, let's say, the process near the border. From my experience, the primary focus is on, let's say, the last mile, so the part of any logistic chain that takes place within the city boundaries, or actually within the zero emission zone boundaries. And much of the international traffic actually never gets there. They load and unload outside zones. So for the shorter term, from my perception, that is, of course, it's an issue because in the long run also other types of vehicles need to be zero emission and also outside cities or outside zones. But I think it's experienced, seen as one of the less urgent matters to solve. Of course, if international things take a long time to solve, so it's good you bring it up. But then, especially at the national level, I guess this would have to be organized because it's by definition affecting multiple cities.
Thank you, that makes it clear. Any other questions or maybe international responses about how their approach looks like? We're curious to know.
Hi, maybe one addition from I'm working for the Dutch government. I'm located in Hamburg, and the specific about this topic is that we see there's a lot of these initiatives within every city. The municipality has, well, electric buses, zero emission zones. The way it's being implemented, you see a lot of related things happening in different cities, and the challenge still is that we have the feeling that every, like whether it's Rotterdam or Amsterdam or another European city, everybody is kind of doing the same thing, but implementing it differently. What could we do to learn more or to exchange more of those things happening within European cities, as it is such a complex matter, and since there's so many companies involved? Maybe somebody could comment a little bit on this.
Maybe Sanne also working internationally.
Yeah, so in the Netherlands, we have the organization where Remco is involved, SPES, where we share all the knowledge between the cities within the Netherlands. I don't know if such organizations also exist in Germany, for example. But if so, then maybe it would be good if we also have some knowledge exchange between SPES and organizations in other countries as well.
Jos?
Yes, well, my answer would primarily be we're already trying at national level to implement uniform access rules. So although it's a local decision politically, the access rules we have agreed in the Netherlands at least will be uniform. And of course it's going to be important, especially for international operators, that this standardization, so to speak, expands over all of the continent. The other thing, many companies are involved. Yeah, they're also involved in the dialogues. One example is, by the way, Polis, which Remco also mentioned. It's an organization of cities cooperating. An interesting dialogue is organized from there with Alice, a platform from the industry specifically aimed at logistics. And this dialogue is aimed towards similar questions, how to, well, to find out what needs to be uniformized or regulated in order to not to hinder the transition we need. On the other, I tend to think it's probably necessary to sacrifice some efficiency by allowing front runners to develop working examples, inspiring others to follow, and then the need for standardization will come from there. That's my view on this question.
Yeah.
One other
Thank
network
you.
that can be mentioned is the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, which covers both some governments, cities, and logistics companies. So not all logistics companies, of course, but that's also a place where the discussion between different stakeholders takes place. I am not aware of another country with a similar approach of that we have, where we involve all these cities in a network. Of course, the cities are one pillar under the uitvoeringsagenda stadslogistiek, which involves also the market players. So that's another platform that we have in the Netherlands to share the experiences also from the market side.
All right. Looking at the time as well, I would like to thank Sanne, Remco, and Jos for sharing their insights and the challenges they might be struggling with. Via the Smart Mobility Embassy, we hope to continue having these discussions and aim to work together with all of you to find solutions. I hope it was a fruitful webinar. You're always welcome to reach out if you have any further questions or requests, interest in further collaboration. We have our next webinar scheduled on the 27th of October, and it was already mentioned here today. It's more kind of like a follow-up on this one, which will be about the enforcement of plug-in hybrid vehicles in these zero-emission zones. For now, have a good day, evening, or afternoon, maybe for some. Hope to stay in touch. Thank you all for participating.